Before sunrise, sirens cut through the thick Miami air. A convoy of unmarked SUVs fanned out under dim streetlights, engines humming like an approaching storm. Neighbors peered through blinds as agents in tactical gear moved door to door. Silent, deliberate, unstoppable. What happens when a nation turns the full force of its federal power inward? This was Operation Tidal Wave, a 4-day crackdown that sent shockwaves across Florida. ICE, CBP, and state police executed simultaneous raids from Jacksonville to Tampa, coordinated with military precision. By the end of the operation, nearly 800 illegal immigrants were detained, a record-breaking figure that federal officials hailed as a triumph of the Trump administration's new domestic security doctrine. But these weren't random arrests. Among those captured were hardened criminals, a Colombian murderer, a Russian fugitive wanted by Interpol, and gang affiliates tied to MS-13 and 18th Street, both designated transnational threats by the Department of Homeland Security. Agents described it as a battle not just for borders, but for the soul of America's rule of law. Behind closed doors, federal command centers resembled war rooms. Live feeds from drones, surveillance trucks, and field units streamed into the operation's core in Washington, D.C. According to Reuters and Defense News, the new Fusion model integrates military-grade intelligence with civilian enforcement, a controversial strategy that blurs the line between national defense and domestic policing. Officials argue it's necessary to combat cartels and smuggling rings exploiting post-pandemic migration routes. The parallels to Ukraine's wartime intelligence model are striking. Just as Kyiv fuses military surveillance with border defense against infiltration, the US is adopting a hybrid approach, merging federal databases, facial recognition, and real-time satellite support. Yet, civil liberties groups warn that such coordination risks creating a surveillance state under the banner of national security. Meanwhile, international observers note how other nations, from Israel's border control near Gaza to China's digital checkpoints in Xinjiang, have deployed similar systems. The question is whether America, long seen as the global symbol of liberty, can maintain its democratic balance amid growing threats. As dawn broke over the Florida coastline, buses loaded with detainees rolled toward detention facilities. Some were violent fugitives, others mere shadows of broken dreams. In the distance, the Atlantic shimmered under a rising sun, a stark reminder that the tide, once unleashed, spares no one. When security demands absolute power, who ensures that freedom survives? Flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of a Miami warehouse as agents dragged out the first suspects, hands zip-tied, eyes hollow. Among them was Jose Sanchez Reyes, a Colombian national wanted for homicide, Rafael Juarez Cabrera, an MS-13 operative who slipped through U.S. borders 3 times, and Sava Klishchevsky, a Russian fugitive flagged by Interpol for manslaughter. One by one, the names revealed a chilling pattern. Violent offenders who had crossed into the United States through a system long described by Homeland Security officials as fractured beyond repair. ICE commanders briefed President Donald Trump that morning. According to BBC News and Reuters, he ordered the operation to target what he called the deepest layers of criminal infiltration. The administration's intelligence reports showed that cartel couriers and foreign gang affiliates had used migrant channels to establish smuggling pipelines stretching from Venezuela to Texas and from Honduras into Florida's ports. Federal sources told The Guardian that the discovery of Russian nationals among the detainees triggered a secondary investigation into potential organized crime financing linked to Eastern Europe. This raised alarm inside NATO's Security Council, already on edge due to escalating cyber attacks traced to the Baltic region. The convergence of gang violence, transnational crime, and geopolitical maneuvering underscored how migration had become not just a domestic issue, but a theater of global competition. Jane's Defense Weekly compared Operation Tidal Wave's coordination to a modern counterinsurgency model. Drones scanned rooftops. Electronic warfare vans jammed local communications. Each arrest was logged through encrypted systems shared between DHS and the Pentagon's Cyber Command. The precision resembled battlefield operations in Ukraine's Zaporizhia front, where reconnaissance dictates every move. America, it seemed, was importing wartime efficiency to its own streets. Yet the human toll is undeniable. Families watched loved ones taken away before sunrise. Children clung to doorframes crying as agents executed federal warrants. Advocacy groups described the scenes as trauma without trial. Al Jazeera reported that migrant shelters in Jacksonville overflowed with abandoned minors, their parents transferred to undisclosed detention centers. The moral dilemma deepened. Can a nation defend itself without eroding its conscience? Trump's aides insist yes, arguing that unchecked migration fuels the same instability witnessed in Europe's 2015 refugee crisis, when terrorist cells slipped into open borders. Supporters see the crackdown as an overdue assertion of sovereignty. Critics call it a descent into fear-driven governance. Across the Atlantic, Israel's targeted arrests in Gaza and Iran's retaliatory raids mirror the same logic: preemptive strikes in the name of security. In Asia, Washington's rivalry with Beijing over technology and migration intelligence fuels a new frontier. Who controls the flow of data and people? As the last detainee van disappeared into the Florida highway, the question remained suspended over the flashing skyline. In protecting borders, is America fortifying its freedom or fencing it in? By the third day of Operation Tidal Wave, the story took an unexpected turn. Not from the streets, but from inside the justice system itself. Federal agents arrested 2 judges accused of obstructing immigration enforcement, sending shockwaves through legal circles. One was Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan, charged with harboring a migrant and obstructing federal proceedings. The other, former New Mexico magistrate Joel Cano, along with his wife, allegedly hid a member of Venezuela's notorious Tren de Aragua gang, a group responsible for kidnappings and murders across South America. The revelation cut deep. Judges are sworn to uphold the law, yet here, they stood accused of defying it. No one is above the law, declared a Department of Justice spokesperson, echoing President Donald Trump's stance that America's legal system must not shield lawbreakers regardless of political standing. BBC News and Reuters quickly confirmed the arrests, calling them unprecedented in scope and symbolism. For Trump's administration, it was a message. The era of selective enforcement was over. The crackdown had reached the judiciary itself. Analysts from DW noted that this moment represented a cultural fault line, the collision between moral compassion and legal duty. Some judges saw themselves as protectors of human rights, others as defenders of the Constitution's integrity. Trump's Justice Department made its position clear. Obstructing federal law in the name of ideology was treasonous to the rule of law. The political aftershocks reverberated through Washington. Protests erupted in Miami and Chicago, with demonstrators waving signs reading, "Judges, not jailers." Meanwhile, conservative media praised the arrests as proof that corruption had seeped into the very institutions meant to deliver justice. The Guardian observed that public trust in the judiciary, already fragile, was fracturing under partisan pressure. Beyond America, global parallels emerged. In Ukraine, courts are under scrutiny for wartime corruption. In Israel, judicial independence remains at the heart of mass protests against Prime Minister Netanyahu's reforms. And in China, the judiciary operates as an arm of state control. The comparison raises a troubling question. Is America, long seen as the guardian of legal integrity, drifting toward the same moral gray zone it once condemned abroad? Inside ICE command centers, agents reviewed the fallout. Some privately expressed unease, fearing that criminalizing judicial discretion might erode public faith and fairness. Yet, as Trump's security chief told Reuters, a nation that cannot trust its judges cannot protect its citizens. As night fell over Miami-Dade, the mood was electric. The arrest had shifted Operation Tidal Wave from a law enforcement story into a national reckoning over power, justice, and fear. What began as a campaign against fugitives was now exposing cracks in America's moral foundation. The question lingered like a storm cloud over the Florida coast. When the guardians of justice themselves stand accused, who will judge the judges? At the heart of Operation Tidal Wave lies a doctrine forged in the West Wing. President Donald Trump's National Enforcement Directive, unveiled earlier this year. According to Reuters and Defense News, it represents the most sweeping coordination between ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and the Department of Homeland Security since the aftermath of 9/11. Trump's message was blunt: no sanctuary, no exceptions. Federal agencies now operate under a unified command grid, a digital fortress connecting databases, drones, and intelligence feeds from partner nations. Jane's Defense Weekly reported that this system, dubbed Sentinel Link, allows real-time tracking of suspects across state lines using AI-supported analysis, similar to NATO's battlefield integration networks. It's a merging of military precision with domestic enforcement, a concept critics call militarized migration control. Inside Washington, Trump's senior advisors framed the policy as part of a broader restoration of national sovereignty. After years of fragmented enforcement, the administration aims to re-establish deterrence, faster deportations, tougher sentencing, and closer ties with Latin American allies in intelligence sharing. The BBC confirmed that over a dozen foreign governments have cooperated in data exchange to locate fugitives hiding under false asylum claims. Yet, this hardline approach has ignited a philosophical clash: security versus liberty. Civil rights advocates warn that AI-driven surveillance could normalize warrantless tracking. The Guardian compared the operations methods to Israel's border algorithm system, which profiles potential threats using predictive analytics. When every citizen becomes a potential suspect, one analyst said, the meaning of freedom shifts from a right to a privilege. The global context is impossible to ignore. In Ukraine, military analysts employ AI-assisted radar grids to intercept Russian infiltration. In Iran, intelligence forces use biometric tracking to root out dissent. And in China, digital surveillance governs the flow of its own people. America's challenge, experts argue, is not technological capacity. It's moral restraint. Trump's defenders counter that the US cannot afford hesitation. With drug overdoses and human trafficking soaring, the president has framed his campaign as a war for civilization's survival. Al Jazeera noted that Trump's speeches now blend domestic enforcement with foreign policy rhetoric, portraying the immigration fight as part of a broader ideological struggle against chaos and lawlessness. Within the Pentagon, however, quiet unease brews. Some defense officials worry that the fusion of military intelligence and civilian policing blurs constitutional boundaries. One anonymous source told DW, the machinery we're building to secure America could one day be used to control it. Still, Trump's administration presses forward, buoyed by rising approval ratings among security-conscious voters. Federal convoys now roll daily from Miami to Tallahassee, each bearing the insignia of a new era. The state's full apparatus synchronized like clockwork. In this balance between liberty and order, America stands at a crossroads. As one ICE commander put it, staring at the digital map glowing red with new targets, you can't protect a free country without drawing lines. The question is, where do you stop? By the fourth day, the storm had spread beyond Florida. Operation Tidal Wave was no longer confined to a single state. It had become a nationwide test of Trump's restoration doctrine, a defining pillar of his second-term agenda. ICE teams deployed northward into Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas, following intelligence trails that connected smuggling corridors to narcotics networks already under federal watch. According to Reuters and BBC News, dozens of new warrants were executed overnight. Arrests surged across Atlanta and Charlotte, with agents seizing weapons, encrypted phones, and fake immigration documents. DHS officials described the expansion as Phase 2 containment. The White House framed it as proof that Trump's border strategy was working faster than expected. But as the operation grew, so did its political cost. In Washington, Democrats accused the administration of overreach, warning that civil liberties were being trampled under the pretext of security. The Guardian reported that congressional hearings erupted into heated exchanges over whether ICE had violated due process by detaining asylum seekers without trial. Meanwhile, pro-enforcement lawmakers invoked the chaos of Europe's migration crisis as justification for Trump's hard line. DW highlighted that the debate had spilled into NATO forums, where allies watched America's approach with both admiration and unease. Germany's foreign ministry publicly questioned the ethical line between law enforcement and intimidation, noting parallels with Europe's own populist movements. Across the Atlantic, the Times of London quoted senior analysts warning that Washington's internal war on illegal migration is reshaping its moral authority abroad. Even inside the United States, divisions widened. In New York and Chicago, protests swelled as activists accused the administration of racial profiling. In Texas and Florida, rallies celebrated Trump's crackdown as a long-awaited defense of sovereignty. The split was visceral, two Americas staring at each other through the fog of ideology. Internationally, the reverberations were immediate. Al Jazeera drew comparisons to Israel's counterinsurgency raids in Gaza, where civilian displacement often followed intelligence-driven operations. In Ukraine, media outlets noted that Trump's fusion of federal agencies resembled wartime mobilization, a domestic version of strategic deterrence. And in Asia, Chinese commentators accused Washington of weaponizing migration control to justify surveillance expansion. Still, for the Trump administration, the operation's success was undeniable. Nearly 1,200 suspects were now in federal custody. CBP checkpoints along the I-95 corridor intercepted dozens more trying to flee north. Each arrest became a data point in a growing argument that only uncompromising enforcement could restore faith in America's borders. But the human stories were haunting. Reuters documented migrant mothers separated from children, husbands deported while awaiting hearings, and families caught in bureaucratic limbo. Even some Republican governors urged caution, warning that mass detentions could overwhelm the justice system. Yet inside the Oval Office, Trump remained resolute, insisting that the rule of law is the foundation of peace. As Operation Tidal Wave rolled into its final phase, a larger question loomed. Could this campaign restore America's global credibility, or would it deepen the fractures within its own democracy? As the last convoys departed Miami for northern states, a hush fell over the command center. On the digital map, red icons, once representing fugitives, slowly faded to gray. Operation Tidal Wave had concluded its first chapter. Nearly 1,200 detainees, including dozens of high-risk criminals and 4 fugitives with Interpol alerts, were in federal custody. Yet, behind the numbers, a more profound question echoed through every agency briefing room. Had America reclaimed control or merely tightened its grip on fear? Reuters reported that Trump's senior security advisors hailed the operation as a decisive success, calling it a model for future nationwide rollouts. Defense News emphasized the operation's hybrid nature, blending counterterrorism protocols, digital surveillance, and real-time AI reconnaissance. America's internal enforcement now mirrored battlefield operations once reserved for foreign wars. But with success came unease. Legal scholars warned that this level of coordination between ICE, DHS, and Pentagon-linked intelligence grids blurred the constitutional line between domestic policing and militarization. The moment law enforcement starts thinking like the military, the citizen becomes the battlefield, one analyst told The Guardian. In Europe, DW observed similar patterns. As Ukraine fights for sovereignty and Israel defends its borders against militant infiltration, Western democracies face the same dilemma. Where does protection end and oppression begin? The Israel-Iran conflict, with its relentless preemptive strikes, mirrors the US philosophy of neutralizing threats before they metastasize. Meanwhile, in China, a vastly different model thrives: total control through digital surveillance and predictive policing. For many experts, America now stands between two worlds: liberty and order. Trump's doctrine of Fortress America has reshaped global debates on sovereignty. Supporters argue that the policy reclaims U.S. strength lost to years of political hesitation. Critics warn it's building a precedent that authoritarian regimes will cite to justify their own crackdowns. As Al Jazeera noted, what America calls security today, others may call suppression tomorrow. Inside detention centers, human costs multiplied. Mothers prayed behind plexiglass partitions. Children drew pictures of homes they may never see again. ICE officers, weary yet defiant, told reporters from BBC News that despite the outcry, the operation saved lives by removing violent offenders. One agent said quietly, "This isn't cruelty, it's order." But the deeper network remains unsolved. DHS analysts believe up to 5,000 additional suspects connected to cartel syndicates, cybercrime rings, and foreign fugitives are still at large. The operation's expansion northward, codenamed Tidal Wave 2, is already in preparation. For now, the nation holds its breath. America's war on lawlessness has entered a new era, one defined by algorithms, conviction, and shadows. The world is watching whether the United States can strike a balance that others failed to master, to be strong without becoming merciless, and to be free without becoming fragile. As the Florida coast fell silent and the Atlantic wind swept over empty streets, a question lingered in the dark. Will this tide cleanse the nation, or drown what makes it free? Operation Tidal Wave marked a defining moment in President Donald Trump's renewed domestic security agenda. Conducted over 4 days across Florida and later expanded northward, the operation resulted in nearly 1,200 arrests, from gang members and fugitives to foreign nationals tied to international crime networks. The crackdown demonstrated unprecedented coordination between ICE, CBP, and DHS under a unified digital command, blending military precision with domestic law enforcement. Yet, the campaign sparked fierce debate at home and abroad. Critics argued it blurred the boundaries between protection and authoritarianism, while supporters hailed it as a necessary step to restore order amid global instability. The arrests of 2 judges accused of shielding migrants deepened questions about the integrity of America's legal system. As analysts drew parallels to global conflicts, from Ukraine's intelligence warfare to Israel's border strikes, Operation Tidal Wave became more than a law enforcement mission. It was a test of democracy's resilience.